Hi, my name is Levent, and this is my ultimate guide to the linking rings. A classic magic trick in which a magician takes solid metal rings and magically links them together, and just as easily makes the rings come apart. Now if you keep watching, I will teach you everything that you need to know to perform this classic magic trick. Coming up first is the history of the Chinese linking rings. And now I'd like to give you a brief history of the linking rings. Now this is not a complete history. If you want to know more about the effect, there's a book that was published recently in China about the early days of the effect, and my friend Pete Byro has been writing a book that he calls The Anecdotal History of the Linking Rings, in which he'll give you more information. But Chinese researchers have found references to the trick, literary references made to the linking ring trick dating back to the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty was a long time ago. I mean, Han Dynasty was roughly between about 9 AD to about 206 BC. Okay, so it places it between 2000 to about 2200 years ago. And the trick appeared, of course, it could have appeared in China even earlier than that. We don't know. And back then, the Chinese used 9 linking rings. Now, today I think the trick is called Zhonggutu Huan in Chinese, but I'm not sure what the words 9 linking rings would be, but back then they used 9 rings. Now, the reason for 9 rings is kind of important. You see, in the Chinese culture, numbers have a significance beyond their numerical value. For instance, in some dialects of Chinese, the word for the number 4 sounds like the word for death. So for the Chinese, the number 4 is considered bad luck. The number 9 is associated in China with the emperor, and it's also associated with the word harmony. And the magicians, for that reason, tended in that period to use 9 rings for their linking ring routine. Another note, Chinese emperors, by the way, to show you the importance of the number, on the Chinese emperor, his robe typically had 9 dragons on it, right? So it was kind of a special number to have. Now, I don't know exactly how the Chinese did the routine in the old days. I think it was something like, the routines were structured something like this. The magician, I think, would have approached with 9 metal rings, could have been made of, iron or brass or bronze, who knows, but the magician counted off the rings and showed that there were 9 separate rings. Then the magician would pass out some rings to spectators to let them examine the rings. So he'd pass them out to several people, and then he'd show rings that they were solid metal, and he'd take the rings and he'd link it together and make chains with the rings. And he could take a ring and he could link it like that, and he would take a ring and link it. He would do patterns with the rings, make interesting designs with the rings, and then the magician would typically gather the rings that the spectators examined, putting them together into long chains. And of course, when a magician came to the right point in the routine, he'd gather all the rings up from the spectators and put them all on one ring. And I think that's pretty much how the Chinese did the trick, with 9 rings. Now, numbers changed over time. Sometimes in Asia, magicians used 7 rings. By the time magicians from China appeared outside of China, they started doing a routine with 8 rings. 8 rings is what they tended to use. And they came to Europe around the early 1800s. That's when European magicians saw them and started to copy the trick. Most notably, there was a Frenchman by the name of Jacques Talon. Now, Jacques Talon was a pastry chef who worked for a Scottish lord, and he was an amateur magician. And somewhere around the year 1830, he saw Chinese acrobats and magicians performing at a place called the Savile House Theatre in 1 Leicester Square, London. And he acquired the goldfish bowl and the Chinese linking ring trick from the Chinese magician performing there, and he started to do it in his act. He quit his job as a pastry chef, became a professional magician, and he became known as Philippe. And Philippe performed in Europe, and he was very well known, and there were other magicians saw him, and whatever you know, about 10, 15 years later, the trick becomes a very, very popular magic effect. And it's performed all over the Western world. So Next, we're going to show you basically the apparatus required, and we're going to show you moves. But the next routine that I'm going to show you is going to come a little bit later, and it's going to be the first of the routines. And I'm going to show you the presentation that Robert Houdin did, Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, and that presentation, it dates to about the year 1840, 1845 in Paris. So coming up next, we're going to show you the apparatus for the Chinese linking rings. Now I'd like to talk about linking ring sizes, weights, and materials. Now in recent years it's become very popular amongst close-up magicians to use these miniature linking rings for routines such as Shudogawa's ninja rings, which are close-up linking ring routines. Now if you're a stage performer, however, I think that the smallest size ring that you should use is an 8-inch diameter ring. It's a very nice size ring, 8-inch diameter. If it's metric, that's 203 millimeters. Currently you can get these rings. These are made in India. I am not crazy about these Indian sets because I think the material is not thick enough. If I given a choice between using these Indian rings or using an older set, I would use an older set. And this is a set of Bob Clam or Suds or Bumpers rings that they made in the 1970s and 80s. They were not that expensive, and you can get them in the used market. I'll show you, these rings are quite a bit thicker. The Bob Clam rings are thicker than the Indian rings, and there's quite a bit of a weight difference. This is 5.5 ounces versus 3 ounces. Okay, so that's 156 grams versus 95 grams. So it's quite a bit heavier. It's a quite beefier ring. The next setup, size up, I'm going to show you, this is an odd size ring. This is a 9.5-inch ring right here. This was given to me by James P. Reiser, a gentleman who's a magician and a master machinist from Arizona. And this is a very, very old set of rings. I'm not sure exactly how old they are, but they are very heavy. They're 9.5-inch diameter. This was a very common size amongst the vaudeville performers. And it's very, very heavy. This is a nickel-plated brass, I think, a nickel-plated brass, and it's 10 ounces per ring. Okay, so that's 285 grams. If you want on a metric size, it's 9.5-inch diameter, which is 241 millimeters in diameter. Now, this other ring is currently currently manufactured. They make them from India, and they make them certainly in the old days. They made them in America by Bob Clam and Bob Suds ring. It's a 10-inch diameter ring. These 10-inch rings, they're about 6.6 ounces, 254 millimeters, 190 grams. This is a really nice size for an average magician to use. 10 inches, you know, is very, very probably the most popular size there is. Now, currently you can actually buy this other set, which is an 11-inch ring, and this 11-inch ring is manufactured in Japan by Mikami. Mr. Mikami passed away last year, but his company, from what I understand, is still making these rings. These are 11-inch diameter, 4.8 ounces, so it's 280 millimeters, and the weight is 135 grams. It's very lightweight and has a beautiful shine to it. They're hollow. I don't know what kind of material they are, but the magnets do stick to them. So there's some sort of ferrous metal. The other rings I showed you before are all solid steel. These are hollow. Now we're going to get down to the next big size, really, is the 12-inch rings. These are 3 different kinds of 12-inch rings. The first ring is solid steel, 12 inches in diameter, which makes it 302 millimeters. So all 3 of these are 12 inch in diameter, 302 millimeters in diameter, 12 inches rather. The steel ring is 12.7 ounces. It's extremely heavy. Now this next ring is really the most beautiful ring I think that made today. This is the Owens hollow ring here. It's hollow stainless steel. Somehow they bend it together and weld it. You don't see any welds on it, but it's quite a bit lighter, and it's actually thicker than this solid steel ring. It's actually thicker. So this ring here, the weight is 8.2 ounces versus 12.7. So 233 grams for the hollow one, 361 grams for the solid steel ring, and the Owens ring looks bigger because it's actually thicker metal. I'll show you another old ring here. Take a look at this. This is another 12-inch ring. It looks very much like the Owens, but this is an aluminum ring. It's aluminum. It's extremely light. That's 3.3 ounces. That's 93 grams. It's very, very lightweight. In fact, this is just 2 grams lighter than the inexpensive 8-inch diameter Indian ring. So it shows you how light this ring is. Now, get down to the biggest size of rings. Would probably be the 15-inch Owens. Now, Owens Company makes these stainless steel hollow rings in 12-inch, in 15-inch and then 10-inch diameters. They make 8-inch rings that are solid steel, but these sizes there are 12-inch in diameter. This one is 13.9 ounces. That's 394 grams, right? And that's 12-inch diameter, 381 millimeter. And just want to bear in mind that when you have a ring this big, you can see that ring, you know, it's hard to handle. Now, I'm not saying you can't use it, but it's hard to handle a big set of rings like this. So keep that in mind. If you want a big set of rings, I would see if you can borrow one or check one out before you actually try to do any magic with it, because it might be more than you can handle. One more thing I want to mention about the ring sizes: there are a special kind of rings which I'm going to explain later called oversized and undersized rings. And for instance, this is a 12-inch Owens ring. And this is an undersized and oversized ring. An undersized ring means it's a ring that's slightly smaller than a regular sized ring, and an oversized means that it's slightly bigger. Now, these are very specialized rings that have very special uses, which I will explain later. But I just want to show you so that there's something called an undersized and oversized. And the last thing I want to mention is that the materials of the rings certainly affect the way they sound. And to some performers, this could be very, very important. For instance, the hollow aluminum rings don't make much noise. But if you have the two solid steel rings, it has a different sound, so, right? And of course the hollow ones, the hollow Owens rings here, see, have a pretty sound on their own. So these are some things to keep in mind with the selection of rings. Sometimes you want rings to have a good sound or a loud sound. So these are all factors in what kind of rings you choose. Coming up next, we're going to show you what constitutes a set of linking rings. Now I'd like to begin a discussion as to what constitutes a set of linking rings. Now, it is my opinion that the earliest routine with the Chinese linking rings consisted of several different kinds of rings. It consisted of 3 rings permanently linked together into a chain, which I call a chain of 3. Then you had 2 rings linked together into a chain. That's a chain of 2. You had 1, 2, 3 single separate rings, and 1 ring with a cut in it, which we call the key ring. So these are the single rings, key ring, chain of 2, chain of 3. So this made up with 9 rings. 9 rings. Now, by the time the Chinese magicians came to Europe, they reduced the amount of rings. By that time, the typical Chinese set was a chain of 3, a chain of 2, and 2 single rings and a key ring, which made a total of 8 rings. Now, in the 1800s, there were basically 3 different kinds of sets of rings that were typically sold in magic shops. Back then, you had the 8-ring set, the Chinese set, like that. You also had a 6-ring set, which I'll just demonstrate to you now. This is what a 6-ring set looked like this. It was 1, 2, 2 rings, chain of 2, 1, 2, 3 separate rings, and a single ring. That was a 6-ring set of the period. Okay, so a chain of 2, 3 singles, and a key was a 6-ring set. And you also had a 12-ring set. A 12-ring set back then was a lot more rings. It's 12 rings, but it's an interesting combination. It was a chain of 3, chain of 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 single separate rings, and 2 key rings. 2 rings with holes cut into them. 2 key rings. That was a set of 12. So you had a 12 set, a 6 set, and an 8 set. Those were typical sets that you would find in magic shops in the 1800s. And I just want you to keep in mind that the amount of rings you have, the combinations of those rings, determines what kind of routine you can possibly do. And to give you an example, this is the beautiful set that was given to me, as I said before, by James P. Reiser. These are very heavy rings, and it's an unusual set because it's a chain of 3, a chain of 2, 2 singles, and 2 keys. It's a 9-ring set. And because of the nature of this set, and by the way, 1 key is a closed key, where that means that the ends are squished together, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, and 1 is an open key. And this leads me to believe that there's 2 ways of using this set. One way you could do it is something that Joseph Dunninger did, which was you'd come out with the rings, count them out, show this separate, and then say to the audience, you see this ring with the cut in it? This is the kind of thing that you'd find in a magic set or something that children's toys. I don't use such a thing, and throw that one away, and then proceed to use the second key to fool the audience. Now, that's one way of using a 9-ring set with 2 keys, but I'll give you another way of doing this. You can also do a routine in which you could eventually get to this point with a closed key. And you can make it a 9-ring chain, a solid chain of 9 rings. So it could be done with a 9-ring set with 2 keys. So, you know, you see, I mean, that is a straight line of 9 rings. So you can do that with the extra key. So keep in mind, the kind of set you have determines what kind of routine you can do with the set. Coming up next, before we show you the key rings and all the various rings, I'm going to explain something really important, which is the secret. The secret of the Chinese rings. I mean, what makes the trick magic? Coming up next. And now I'd like to discuss what I consider to be the secret of the Chinese linking rings. The first secret to the trick, basically, or what makes it magical, goes back to one of my fundamental rules of stage magic. Rule number 8 specifically says, deception can be enhanced by lengthening the time between the secret move and the magical effect. In other words, if you do a secret move and immediately have a magical effect happen right afterwards, sometimes the mind of the spectators can make the connection between the secret move and the magical effect. But if you can delay the presentation of the effect from the technique that allowed the effect to happen, then it's more mysterious. And we'll take, for instance, the optics of the rings. If you look at these rings, you see this one is a key ring, right? It's got a hole cut in it right there. It's a key ring, and this is a solid ring. Now, if I were to link the rings together, you visually cannot tell because the rings are shiny. You cannot tell if the rings are linked together or if they're separate. See? I can do this. Are they separate or are they unlinked? You can't tell. Okay, we'll do it again. See? They're separate. See? They're linked. Visually, you can't tell. So this allows the magician to secretly put the solid ring through the opening of the key ring and link it together and allow the audience to think that it has not linked yet. So for instance, let's do a secret link here. I can say, look at the ring. I take the rings and I say solid rings of steel. Solid rings of steel. And then I make the audience think that this is the moment in which the rings are linked together. But it happened seconds earlier. The same thing if I want to unlink the rings. I can take the rings and separate them and make believe that they're still together. And then give this moment to make them come apart, to make you think that that's the moment in which the magic happens, okay? So that's fundamental rule of stage magic, because some people call this time misdirection, all right? So basically, that's one of the principles of the linking rings, is the fact that they have the optics, or the shininess, so that you can't tell whether they're linked or unlinked. Just can't tell visually until, of course, you separate the rings. Next, we'll show you the next rule that affects the Chinese linking rings. The other rule that affects the Chinese linking rings is my rule number 2, which is the big movement masks the smaller secret movement. You see, the movement of putting this solid ring through the opening, through the key ring, is a small movement. But if I do a bigger movement, it hides that little movement of putting it through. So in other words, if I went like this and said, look, it's separate, it's connected, it's separate, the brain sees this spot here. See, it's connected, it's separate. But if I do this other bigger movement, it distracts from that ring passing through the opening and it links together. Or if I want to unlink it again, it's a big movement. I can just move the rings together over and over until they come apart. Coming up next is the last rule involving the Chinese linking rings. And now I'd like to explain one last secret of the Chinese linking rings. Now, what I'm about to say is probably pretty controversial, but I can only give you my personal opinion on this video and tell you what I truly believe. Now, in my fundamental rules of stage magic, there's a rule number 7, which says, When performing a routine with a repetitious effect, it is far more deceptive if you vary your methods. Okay, I'm going to say it again. When performing a routine with a repetitious effect, it is far more deceptive if you vary your methods. Before we get to the rings, let me just illustrate it in a simple way. This is a trick called a Miser's Dream. I actually have a 3 DVD set on the Miser's Dream called The Ultimate Guide to the Miser's Dream. And we'll show you some Miser's Dream technique here. Miser's Dream is a trick in one of the versions, at least, where you have a handful of coins in your left hand, and you hold those coins in a pail, like so. And you're able to squeeze out one coin at a time from the left hand into the pail. So it falls in. Now, if in your right hand, if you were to have a coin and seemingly drop it into the pail and thumb palm at the same time, as letting the coins drop in the left hand, it seems as if you dropped the coin in your right hand in the pail, but it's still there. So this way a magician could make it appear as if he's making coins appear from the air like that. Now, if you do this trick over and over and over, doing the same method, some people in the audience can get wise to what you're doing. So how does a magician make this more deceptive? Well, he follows fundamental rule number 7, okay, which is vary your methods. So let's say I'll take some more coins, and I'll hold them in my left hand, like so. Put the pail in my hand, and let's say I start off with a penny. And I show a penny to the audience, and show them, look, I can drop the penny into the pail. Now, when I reach in to get the penny, what I secretly do is I secretly drop one of the silver dollars into my right hand. So now I can drop the penny into the pail like this, and then make the silver dollar appear. I can thumb palm it, I can show the coin, and try different methods to make you think that I dropped the coin in there. And I can do some more coin productions. I can do a T. Nelson Downs coin production like that, and drop that in there. And I can also make the coins appear from both hands in a stream like that. So you see, I've changed the methods up. I'm not just doing one way. I'm not just doing a thumb palm and dropping. I'm doing other techniques that makes the trick more deceptive. So how does this apply to the linking rings? Well, it's simple. Linking rings is a simple trick. You have a key and you have a solid ring. And because of the way the magician handles the key, makes the people think that the ring is solid, he takes the rings and seemingly links them together. And an astute audience member would probably figure that one of these rings has a cut or a break in it, and they would be absolutely right. And even if you do a 3-ring routine, it just becomes obvious. One of those rings has a cut in it, and the spectators would be right. So how does a magician hide that? Well, if you have more rings, usually you can pass rings out for examination and confuse the audience into thinking that they looked at all of the rings. And you can use other methods. For instance, here's a set of 6 rings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rings of steel. Now you can pass some of these rings out for examination, or you can take a ring here and link that onto there. And then you can take another ring and you can link that on like that. And you can actually pass this ring out for examination, a chain of 3. And people can look at that ring to their heart's content, and there's nothing for them to see. There's no gimmick there. Then a magician can take a ring, link it like this, and then he can borrow another ring that he got from the spectators, link it like that, and then the magician can borrow this ring over here, and then go like this and show 6 rings linked together, like that. Now, how does this work? Well, some of the rings were permanently attached. These 2 rings here are not really linked, I'm just holding them. And one of these rings, which is down here, second to the bottom, it's what's known as a locking key, which means that it's got a device in it which lets you open the ring and lock it up. So I use multiple methods. Okay, so this is just a thought for you. If you want to do a simple ring routine with 2, 3 rings, it's going to be more difficult to make the trick a true miracle. But if you add more rings, more techniques to fool the audience, then at least I think the trick becomes more deceptive. Coming up next, we're going to show you the various key rings that are used for the Chinese rings. And now I'd like to talk about key rings, which are rings that have openings in them. The key ring. Now, there's many different kinds of key rings throughout the history of magic. First, let's look at some of the kinds that were from the 1800s. Now, the very first kind of ring were from the Chinese, and they used something that we call an open key. Take a look at this detail. Now this is the basic open key. This is an Owens one. It shows you how beautifully it's made. In Owens, this is a tubular stainless steel tube with little brass plugs on the end there. And it's a beautiful detail, but this is basically an open key. Now in the 1800s, people had open keys, and they also had something we call a closed key. And this is what a closed key looks like. A closed key basically is a ring in which it's just forced together, and it just stays closed just by pressure. So if I loosen it, let go, it snaps shut just like that. That's a closed key. So you have the open key and the closed key. Now, in Robert Houdin's book in France from 1868, there was also a closed key which had a little bump, a little bead sticking out of one end, and a little indentation on the other end, so it matched up. So sometimes they used that in the old days. A latter magician named Clark Fonda actually manufactured a set of rings that's similar to that. I don't have one to show you, but James P. Reiser showed it to me, and it's very cleverly made and uses a similar sort of hookup, except it starts on sideways, and there's a little bit more machining detail to it than just a bump and a closing there. Now the other kind of key that was done in the old days was the key like this. This is a slanted, rather a diagonal key, not a slanted key, but it's a diagonal key. And you see it's just a cut that's cut at a slant. Now the reason a magician would use a ring like this, or any closed key, is after you link a ring, you can let go, and it seems as if the rings are linked together. So like, let's say here's my closed key. I would snap it around, and it would link, and you could show the rings linked together. And I'll unsnap it, and it comes out like that. With a diagonal cut, what you could do is you could just force it through, and I'll do it where your finger would be there, but you would just force it through, and it would link together like that. And if your finger was here, you can show a ring empty, put your finger there, and you can snap it through, and it comes out. And I'll show it to you this way, at this angle, so you can see what's going on. When this ring comes to the diagonal, it pushes through. And you rotate the ring around, and you push it through again. And this kind of ring, by the way, allows you, the diagonal cut, allows you to spin the rings around the solid one without disturbing it. Okay? Now these are from the 1800s, these type of key rings. 20th century magicians came up with what's known as a slant cut. As I said before, that was a diagonal. This is a slant cut. And that means that the ring is cut at a slant. It allows you to spin the ring without it making noise, but it also allows you to do like a striking move and hitting it and making a ring link. So by hitting a ring this way, it forces the ring to come through. Okay, like that. And that's a slant cut there. Another type of ring is an offset, actually, an offset key, which is just forcing the rings this way. Some magicians prefer this, and these routines don't allow for many silent links, but some magicians use this offset like this. We'll also show you now, of course, there's a couple other designs of these type of keys. There's something called a ghost ring. Now, I don't own a ghost ring, but I do know how they work. Joe Porper made a ring that is kind of functions like this. It has a system in which a ring will open and close and snap back to its original position no matter which way you penetrate it. So you can penetrate it any way, and the second it just snaps right back like that. I can't really, I don't want to tell you the detail of how it works because that's proprietary for Joe Porper, but basically he made a ring that's called a ghost ring, which has a toggle like that. A magician by the name of Steve Pellegrino actually submitted this. He did this in the 1970s, and he basically made a key ring that closes up. And basically, I probably did not do a good job on this, but he took a piece of Mylar tubing and just put it right there, a little tube of Mylar, so that he could do a ring routine, and it could seem as if that ring is solid when it is not. And I'll just pop it out, and that's just a little tube of Mylar. And I want to thank Steve Pellegrino for submitting this for the video. So it's just a tube of Mylar. Now we get down to one more key design I should show you. Actually, this is another open key, and this one is from Mikami Craft of Japan. It's just a rounded edge. To some extent, it's actually kind of nice. To some might feel that it makes it a little smoother when a ring penetrates through, and that's possibly true. It's got a little end cap. In any case, it's a beautiful detail. It shows you the workmanship that the late Mikami did on his products. Now, we're going to talk next about locking keys, and a locking key. We'll show you a couple of them here. This is one that Bob Clam used to sell. And basically, we're going to zoom in on here and you'll see the detail on this. Now, if you see up close, on the Bob Clam ring, it's a machine cut so that the ring closes up like this and stays shut. And by shifting it, the ring could pop out. Now, Bob Clam originally had these made and they were smooth. And he found that some people, it closes so well that he found that some people have a tough time finding the cut. So later on he improved the product and had a couple of grooves machined, cut on the edge here, so that when you bring your finger up you can feel that edge there. And a magician, how he would use it, he'd hold the rings like this, and then you'd pop it with your finger, one-handed, and you'd unlink it like that. And then you would link it closed like that. And that's the Bob Clam linking ring, locking ring. The next ring I'd like to show you, I don't actually have one in my collection, but James P. Reiser does, and he sent me 2 photographs that show that they're open and closed. So take a look at this. This is a detail of the Merv Taylor locking rings. Now, the advantage of the Merv Taylor rings is they have that little metal pin that locks the rings together, so it's actually more stable than a Bob Clam type of locking ring. Now, next let me show you this next ring, which is an Owens locking ring. Now, this is the Owens locking ring, and I'm going to pop it here and open it up for you to see it. Now, I'm going to put a piece of paper behind this so that you can get a little bit of a detail of what that is. That's a little notch cut in the ring, and when you put it together it locks up pretty solid. That's the Owens locking ring. Now there's also some other locking rings that I certainly don't have. For instance, there's a locking ring by Oak van Doken of the Netherlands. I saw him at a magic convention. He had some beautiful rings, but he refused to show me his locking rings unless I purchased it. And Joe Porper has a few models as well. This last one, locking ring here, this is a magnetic locking ring. And what it is, it's an aluminum ring with 2 rare earth magnets on the end, so that it allows the magician to handle the rings by simply just closing it and locking up the ring, and then popping it open with his fingers and then locking it like that. I'd like to point out one more thing about these magnetic rings. Now, while I was playing with these magnetic rings, something occurred to me. These rings are designed, the magnetic locking ring, to work with another ring which is non-magnetic, in other words, 2 aluminum rings. But I thought, what if a magician were to have 2 non-magnetic rings, they could be stainless steel or aluminum, and if they were to put 2 magnets on 2 spots inside the hollow ring, and put another 2 magnets in the inside 2 spots of another hollow ring, then the rings would stick together. Now this is only you're going to see this is only in 1 spot, but if a magnet were to stick together like that in 2 spots, it would appear as if these rings were a single chain. And then a magician would just simply pull them apart and separate them and pass them out for examination. So this is a little crazy idea that I thought of while playing with this. If anyone wants to, continue with this or work on this, you're free to develop a ring like this, or maybe I'll even work on it for the future. Before I get to explaining the various ring moves and ring routines, there's a couple of things that you really should know. Now, there are basically 4 different types of rings. Okay, to remind you again, there's a key ring. It's a ring that has some form of opening. There's a solid ring, which is just a solid ring of steel. There's a chain of 2 rings, which is permanently welded together, chain of 2 rings. And there's a chain of 3. Those are the 4 basic rings. Now, while researching for this video, I looked at all sorts of magic videos concerning the rings, and I felt that the linking rings is one of the most difficult tricks to explain on video because it's very confusing to the eye. it's confusing because all of these rings look alike. You can't tell which ones are the chain of 3, the chain of 2, just by looking at it. So what I did was I got a set of rings and I colored them. So in this video, when needed, I will be using sets of rings such as this. A chain of 3 is in color yellow. The chain of 2 is in red. And the key ring is a green ring, and there'll be some tape showing you the opening of the ring. And this just isn't in the 12-inch size. I also have a set in the 8-inch. So depending on the routine, you're going to see different colored rings in the hand. So for instance, if I were to shoot a presentation of this, if I had the rings held this way, you would know instantly that this is the chain of 3, this is the chain of 2, this is the key, and this is the single. So if I were to say count them in my hand, you'd know which one is the chain of 3, the chain of 2, the key ring, and because of these lines, you'd know where the opening of the key ring is. Now, we also have in some of the routines, just some of the routines, you're using some other gimmicks, such as an oversized or undersized ring, which means a ring that's bigger and smaller than a regular ring. These will have stripes on it, and that'll be just for those routines. We'll show you something a little bit different. But the key here to know is that the chain of 3 is going to be in yellow, the chain of 2 is going to be in red, and the key rings are going to be in green. Not for every routine. I mean, some moves are just 2 rings, and it's going to be very easy to understand what's going on. But when we get complex routines, we're going to use this color system. One more thing, we have these 2 stands here, and you got 2 corners here where I can put the rings. Some routines I'm going to use spectators from the audience. And these will represent, during the explanation phase, the spectators. So if I pass out rings to a spectator, I can pass it out to this person here, pass some rings out to this person here. So these will represent people in the audience so that you can keep track of what spectators are doing what with which rings. So coming up next, we're going to show you basically the moves with the Chinese linking rings. And now we get to one of the first technical parts of the Chinese ring trick, and that is handling the key ring, the ring with the opening in it. Now, if this was a closed or a locked key, the key would be closed and you wouldn't need to really hide it. But the ancient Chinese used this open key, and they held their hand on the ring, just like this. And because they had multiple rings and they were able to, through misdirection, distraction, they were able to keep the audience from realizing that one of the rings had an opening in it. Now, there's a ways that I'll show you in a minute to display a key ring to make people think that the ring is actually solid, but there's something else I'd like you to keep in mind. By the time of the late 1800s, this trick had been around in Europe for about 50, 60 years. And at that point, it got very highly developed. And some magicians were just retaining this ring and not letting go of that key ring. And this brings into mind something that was written in a book in the year 1885. This is a book from London, published in 1885, and it's written by a magician by the name of Edwin Sachs. And Edwin Sachs says, "Some conjurers become breathless at the bare idea of allowing the key ring to leave the hand, whereas when properly managed there is not the least danger to be apprehended. When the ring is passed over the arm, the hand does not leave the opening until it is well embedded inside the elbow joint. It is bad policy to hold one ring continually in the hand, as the fact is extremely likely to be noticed." So magicians of that period noticed that there were magicians that were just holding this ring in a suspicious manner. And Edwin Sachs is saying that if you've got an opening there, don't be afraid to put the ring there. I mean, you keep your hand over the open key, but you put it on your elbow, and you can talk and act as if that is a solid ring, okay? And if you have good angles, I mean, if people aren't looking at your side, you can hold a key ring in your hand. I mean, if you're the only one seeing the opening, there's no problem with that. Now, next we're going to show you some techniques that are used to make a key ring appear to be solid. Probably the oldest technique that's used to make people think that the key ring is solid is to place one hand over the opening and place the other hand on the ring, and then pull the ring through the other hand, so that the key is kept closed, the opening is kept locked in one hand, and pull the ring through your hands like this. And this is how the oldest magicians used to do the trick. So make it easier to understand again. We'll use the fake key ring here. This is, and the opening is in white. And you place your hand there and you just draw this through your hand. So if my hand was not closed, that's all I'm doing. So if I close my hand, it looks like a solid ring. And this is the oldest technique in the history of magic, as far as I know, to show a key ring to be solid. Another method to make the audience believe that the key ring is solid is to toss the ring. So you toss it in your hand, like so. Now what I'm doing is I'm throwing this ring and making it rotate, and I'm catching it at the opening. So I'm going to use the substitute ring here, just so you can clearly see what's going on here. I toss the ring, and I catch it at the opening like that. Now this is a little timing thing, but with a little bit of practice it's not difficult to do. Now to make it rotate twice is much harder, but just to do one light throw and catch it like that is fairly simple. That's tossing the ring. Another method to hide the open key is to do a key twirl, which could be done like this, or even with an open hand like that. The key twirl. To perform the key twirl, you have the open key in the palm of your hand, and you have it so that the opening is not showing to the audience. In other words, the audience sees the back of your hand, and you just simply twirl it like this, and it gives the simulation of freedom of movement with the ring that makes the people think that there's no opening in it. Now, you can also do it this way, but people would see the opening in your finger, so instead, you do this modified key twirl. You twirl it on your fingertips, which works like this. You hold it in your hand, you put your middle finger right there, and you flip it up like that. It's just a little flipping movement, and that is the key twirl. This next method of displaying an open key appears in the video of Jim Cellini demonstrating his ring magic, as well as the book about the late Jim Cellini's ring routine. And I'm going to show you what you do is you have an open key, and what you do is you pull the ring back and show your hand like this. So you pull it this way and you show the hand like this. And the open key is there, so let's take a look with this substitute ring and see what it looks like. With the open key is held in the right hand, the ring is turned back, and the opening is hidden behind the right thumb, like this. So you pull it through your hand and you show it like that, and that's the way Jim Cellini displays a key ring. This next move is a Larry Jennings move to hide the key. Works like this. That. And this is Larry Jennings' move. Let me show you how it works using the substitute key. Now with the key ring, it's held in the right hand. Now this is the performer's view. What happens is the left hand is closed, right hand is open, and the ring is shifted, then held by the right hand, and then the left hand is opened and shown out to the audience, like this. And you see that edge of that ring, that top edge of the key, rests on your middle finger right there. So slowly it works like this. This hand is open, it slides the key ring like so. It slides the key ring, closes, the other hand is shown open, and rotated this way. And that's Larry Jennings' method of displaying the key. Another way to make the audience believe that the open key ring is a solid ring is to include a second solid ring and switch one ring for the other. Now the most basic of these moves, the most common move, appears in the book, the Dai Vernon Book of Magic. I'm not so sure that this move is Dai Vernon's invention, especially in light of the move that's shown in David P. Abbott's House of Mystery. Maybe Vernon might have improved the move, but I think it's a pretty old idea. And this is a whole category of ring moves. The first one, like I said, this is from the Vernon Book of Magic, and it's to do this. Remember, this is the key ring. Spin one ring, and then spin the other ring. And all you're doing is you're switching one ring for the other. Now to make this easy to understand, I'm going to substitute this key with the open key. I'm going to put it through here so you can see right there, that's the opening. You spin one ring, you bring your left hand, bring it up this way, transfer the key ring to the other hand, and spin. So we'll do it from the beginning. Left hand comes up, transfers it this way, and you spin. Let's take a look at it from the performer's view. From the performer's view, the key ring is in the right hand. The left hand spins the solid ring, holds it like a book, then closes and transfers the key from the right hand to the left hand, lets the single ring drop, and then continues to spin. And that's Vernon spinning the rings. This next variation of spinning the rings appears in the book The Magical World of Slidini by Carl Fulves. In this type of move, you have the key ring in the left hand with the solid ring over it. The right hand spins the ring and seemingly transfers the rings from hand to hand. And it seems as if the bottom ring has been changed for another ring. Now, we're going to show you how this works by substituting, of course, this ring for the obvious key there. The left hand holds the key ring. Right hand spins. The right hand comes in through the single ring, comes up, grabs the key ring, and as your body turns, as you turn, you flop this other one so the single ring goes to the bottom. So in tempo, it's like this. One hand goes in, comes in, and spins that way. And that's Slidini's variation of spinning the rings. In the 1930s, the extremely clever Jack Miller had this method of spinning the rings. In his right hand, he had the open key. Left hand, he had the single. He'd spin the single, turn it around, and spin the other ring. And that was his method. From the performer's view, Jack Miller has the open key in his right hand. With his left hand, he spins the ring, turns it over, and he actually spins the open key and catches it the moment it turns around. So the ring is spinning, it spins and spins, and when it gets to here, this spot, he catches it as it flips over, like that. And that's Jack Miller's spinning the rings. This is a Larry Jennings move in which you seemingly display two solid rings, but secretly one of these rings is an open key. Sequence works like this. Show one ring, and show the other ring, like that. The Larry Jennings switch is very easy to understand with the visible key. Key ring stays on the arm, solid ring in front. What you do is you show the solid ring, twirl it between your fingers. Then with your left hand, you grab the key ring at the opening. You toss the solid ring with your right hand, but when you catch it, you take your hand from through the ring and you bring it to the front and catch it to the front. Then you place the solid ring in front of the key ring, put it on your arm, and pull out the other ring. So basically it looks like this. Twirl a ring, toss, catch, put it back on your arm, and show this ring. So now if I were to substitute this open key with the silver ring like this, it looks like this in tempo. Show one ring, and you show the other ring. And that's a Larry Jennings switch. Now I'd like to talk about the subject of handing key rings out to spectators in the audience. Now, if you have a well-made locking key ring like this Owens or Merv Taylor, in other words, a key ring that just doesn't pop open easily, but one that you need a little physical action to lock it, you can pass this ring out to spectators in the audience. I've seen Richard Ross do this. Except the secret to it is to have the opening of the key on the bottom side. You don't want to hand it to a person so they're looking at it. And you basically just hand them out for a moment. Hey, here's a ring. Take a look at that. You grab a few rings and you pick it back up. And in a subtle way, people will remember that you passed out, all the rings to the audience. There's a very good handling of this, by the way, using two singles and a locking key in Harry Rice's book, Secrets of an Escamator. Unfortunately, I was unable to get permission from Harry Rice to explain his handling in this video, but basically it's well worth getting. By the way, it's a great book anyway. Well worth getting it if you want to do a 3-ring routine with a locking key. Now, here's another question. Can you actually pass an open key out to spectators in the audience? Well, throughout the history of magic, there have been many cases in which magicians have passed out these rings, these key rings, And they do it by simply giving the key ring to a fellow magician in the audience. This is, I mean, sometimes it could be just a friend, a stooge. You can say, here, you examine the ring, and the friend grabs the key and examines it, makes believe there's no trick to the ring. But very often, just by knowing that there's a magician, fellow magician in the audience, it has been done. You know, the magician will just hands to spectators, say, look at all the rings, and the magician goes, oh, there's a key ring. He doesn't show it to anybody, and hands it back to his fellow magician. Now, this next little idea was given to me by a magician named Tony Brent, who performs in Orlando, Florida. And Tony, sent this in for this video. What Tony does is he has a large set of rings, about 8, 9, 10 rings, and he does some fake linking and unlinking with the chains of 2s and 3s, passes them out, passes out the singles to the audience, and when he gets to the last ring, it is the open key. And he says, now sometimes in magic shops they sell rings with an opening in it. And as he's saying that, he hands this to a guy sitting in the front row who seems to be alone. So basically he finds somebody who's not near anybody else, and he says, you know, magic shops have these rings with the opening in it. And he hands it to the guy. And the guy looks at it and he sees the opening in the ring. So basically, you know, the magician's saying, in other words, he's not saying all these rings are closed, and the guy in the audience says, hey buddy, you got this ring here. No, he just says, magic shops sometimes sell these little rings with the opening in them, and he hands it to a guy, and the guy looks and he sees the opening to which Tony just referred. And then he says, everyone take a look at those rings, make sure you examine them, then he gets them back up and proceeds with his routine and fools people with the linking and unlinking. And Tony had told me that many times the guys that he hands the open ring to will come to him after the show and say, boy, I saw that ring that was open, but I have no idea how you linked all the other rings. So that's a great tip from Tony Brent, and thank you, Tony, for submitting it to this DVD. And now I'd like to discuss something known as a ring count. Let me explain what the ring count is and what it does. Now, a magician has a set of rings, and some of those rings are permanently connected. So the magician has to make the audience believe that all the rings are completely separate. So what the magician does is he counts the rings to say, like, you know, here I have 8 rings of steel, he counts 8 rings. But what he's doing in a subtle way is he's making the audience believe that the rings are completely free and separate. Now, I believe that this technique of the basic ring count, which we call the drop count, that's the first method, it dates back to ancient China. However, the first time it actually appears in print is in the year 1853 in a book from France. The book was called Les Nouvelles Magies Blanches Dévoilées, which is the New White Magic Unveiled, and it was written by Jean-Nicolas Poncin. Now, I'm going to show you a basic simple drop count. Okay, we have here a bunch of rings. These 3 rings are connected. These 2 are connected, these 2 are separate. The last ring is the key. So this is one version of a drop count. So I'm going to do it, and then afterwards I'm going to show you how it all works. So the magician would have, say, I have here 8 rings of steel. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rings of steel. And that is a drop count. One of the most important things about a drop count is that a magician has to prepare the rings in a very special way and in a special order. Now, the most important set of rings during a drop count is the chain of 3. So a chain of 3 rings. Now, for just a moment, I'm going to replace this set of chain of 3 with another set. In this set, this is a little mock-up set, I put some blue tape around the middle of the chain. And we did this so that you can visually, on video, completely understand how the rings are set up. So let's take a look at a close-up of this. As you can see, the middle ring of the chain of 3, in this case, has blue stripes on it. Now, when I hold the rings, let's say in my left hand, I would hold the blue ring deepest into the hand. Deepest, that's the center ring. Then I'll take both of the other rings, the other ends of the chain, and place them this way. So that when the rings are counted, they fall easily into the other hand. Now, if I were to do it the other way around, the rings could bind up. They don't fall properly. Let me show you in the other direction what this looks like. Okay, so now from the audience view, the one closest to the audience would be the center ring. The other 2 rings are faced away, so you drop the other 2 rings first and then drop the center ring. Now, if it was the other way around, it could sometimes bind up the rings. You could have a problem. Now, if you're stuck and you have to do the trick, you could probably fake it, dropping it in any order. But it actually does look the smoothest. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to use here's a chain of 3. I'm going to put 2 rings in front. So I'll put one ring in the back, one ring in the front. Now watch how smooth this looks. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so this is a way that makes sense. And now that you've seen that, we're going to start with the ring counts, with the drop counts in sequence. Okay, so now we have my set of mock-up rings here, right? This is the open key, which is the green ring with the white tabs on it, so you know where the opening is. The 2 single rings, which are silver. The chain of 2, which is red. And the chain of 3, which is yellow. Now, I'm going to count these rings in my hand. I'm going to show you there's different ways to do the drop count. Now, one way is you could do it, well, you face this way and you drop the rings to the hand. You go 1, 2, 3, you pause, 4, 5, 6, and then you highlight the fact that the rings are separate. Okay, so some people like to start off with the big numbers at the beginning. You do this, you talk. Now, other magicians like Laurent used to do it where you would have these rings. You drop the singles first. So you come out and you talk to the audience and you have this ring single, you do it casual, and then you start speeding up the count. Now, I suggest that I don't think it's a good idea, generally speaking, to have just the 3 rings linked together and show them like this. I think it's far more deceptive for a magician to have at least one ring facing the audience, so that blocks these other rings. So when you count them, you have them. Let me make sure they're set properly. You count them, you'd go like this, and that looks nice. Or you can do a pass count, which is to do the drop count while you're sideways and while the body is turning. So I'm going to show you how that works. What you do is you'd have a single. So remember, got the key, 2 singles, chain of 2, and a chain of 3. So a magician would show a ring to the audience, talk to the audience. He'd place another ring there, and another ring there, and then now he turns this way, and then he drops these rings here, and then drops the last 3 like that. And in tempo, it's sort of like 1 ring, 2 ring, ladies and gentlemen, 3 rings of steel, 4 rings, 5 rings, 6, 7, 8 rings of steel for you. Okay, so there's a lot of ways of doing this, and again, the order in which the rings are set up is determined by the routine you want to use. Coming up next is some more counts. This next technique is called the wrist count. It's not too common today, but it was very common 100 years ago. And let me show you how it works. Remember that on the outside here is a chain of 3, the chain of 2 in the singles. And what a magician does, he says, I have here a bunch of rings, and he counts them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rings. Or sometimes a magician will start it this way. He'll start it on his forearm. Count this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rings. Now, admittedly, it's pretty hard to do with a big, thick set of rings because you got to grip your whole hand around it. But it's just a simple principle. All it is that even if these rings are connected, it doesn't matter. They just, even though they're connected in the hand, they do look separate when you count them like this. And that's the old wrist count. This next move was performed by the vaudeville magician Chung-Ling Soo and much later on by Tony Slidini. It's a way of displaying the rings and making you think that they're separate by twirling them in your hand. So remember, some of these rings connect. You come out and you go, and that's just simply twirling them around your hand, makes them seem as if they are separate. This next display was also performed by Chung-Ling Soo and much later on by David P. Abbott. It's a way of making you think that the rings are separate by putting them on the arm and then letting them fall to the hand. Arms up. And it's very simple. The rings are chained. They just fall down the arms and give the impression that the rings are separate. This next count is the Chung-Ling Soo count, the one that he used in his vaudeville act. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rings. The Chung-Ling Soo count. Now, this might look like the drop count that I performed before, and it is a drop count, but there's one important difference about these 12 rings. What's different about these 12 rings is there's really 11 rings here. It's a false count that Cheng-Ling Hsu did, and later on when we show you Cheng-Ling Hsu's routine, we'll explain exactly why he did this. But for this demonstration purposes, let me get rid of the chain of 2 and the chain of 3 and replace them with this set. This is what happens. The trick works on the thumb, sort of like when someone doing what they call a stealing seconds, or if you see Fred Capps doing the Gene Gordon's Dizzy Dollar routine, it's a false count. It's the thumb that does the work. 1 ring, 2 ring, 3 ring, the thumb comes down, 4, 5. Then the sixth time, when the hand comes down, the thumb comes down but doesn't drop a ring. And then you continue dropping 1 ring after the other. Okay, the Cheng-Ling Hsu count. So we'll do it again. Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And if we replace these with the original set, looks like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The Cheng-Ling Hsu count. And now I'd like to talk to you about something that's known in English as the Odin count. O-D-I-N, Odin count. Now this count was invented by an extremely clever magician by the name of Claudius Odin. Now Monsieur Odin was a performer who worked in the late 1800s, early 1900s at the Théâtre Robert Houdin. Later on in the early 20th century, he started working in the streets of Paris, in the Fourth Ward of Paris. And he did originally a 12-ring routine, a Robert Houdin routine, and then eventually he developed his own 8-ring routine. And it became a classic routine. People in France, magicians in France, were amazed by it. And eventually, Monsieur Odin had his friend, Monsieur Gardet, publish a book, compile a book of the techniques of Claudius Odin. The book was called Les Anneaux Chinois, and it was published in 1929. Now, Les Anneaux Chinois is French for the Chinese rings. About a year or two later, it was published in English. And in English, it's called the Odin Rings, and it was translated by Victor Forelli. Now, coming up next, I'm going to show you the Odin count, or the Odin count. It says it's kind of odious to say it in English, but I'm going to use the English version for you. So, Odin count coming up next. I present to you a mystery with 8 rings of steel. Let me count them out for you. We have here 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 ring, 4 rings, 4 rings of steel, which I place onto the table. And we have another 4 rings. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 rings. 4 plus 4 rings equal 8 rings. The Odin count. To make it easier for you to understand the Odin count, I'm going to substitute the other rings for this set, which as before, as you see, the key is the green ring, chain of 2 is red, chain of 3 is yellow, and the 2 single rings are silver, so you can see the fancy finger work. Now before I continue with this, I just want to say that Claudius Odin used to do the trick at shoulder height. And this brought a little interesting commentary in the 1946 book Rings in Your Fingers by Daryl Fitzke. In this book, Mr. Fitzke says, "Holding the rings at shoulder height particularly is unnatural in my belief. This, of course, may be remedied by dropping the hand lower. I can see no reason why the inventor's position is necessary." The reason why Mr. Fitzke did not understand why Monsieur Odin did it that way is because Fitzke did not know what I know. Namely, Monsieur Odin in that period was a street performer. So he's doing the trick at shoulder height, the count, because he's got a circle of people on the street. If he's doing it at his waist level, the way Fitzke suggests, it would not be seen. So there's a reason why Monsieur Odin did it the way he did. So truth be told, you can do it anyway. Sometimes, if I'm doing a historical recreation of Odin, I'll do it at shoulder height. But truth be told, it should be a little bit more natural, held this way. In any case, let me show you how this move works. We're going to do a little close-up here, and I'm going to show you all the finger work for the Odin count. Now with the Odin count, the trick is done facing the audience this way, the hands coming together, but I'm going to show you the performer's view. What happens is, the left hand holds the rings in the order, so you got the key, the chain of 2, chain of 3, and 2 singles. The hand comes forward, takes 1, the right hand takes 1 ring away and shows it. Then it does it the second ring. While it does that, the middle finger of the left hand separates the chain of 3 and from the chain of 2 and the key. So as the right hand comes here, the middle and ring and pinky picks up the chain of 3, while the left thumb grabs the 2 separate rings. So I'm going to do that again so you can understand what's going on. Watch. 1, 2, cause a little break. See, look, the index finger there is causing a break. These fingers come together, like so, and the thumb comes down and pulls that ring away. So you get the chain of 3, and then the single is added, so then 4 rings are shown, and these rings are placed on the table with the single ring on top. So now the move is repeated with the remaining rings in the hand. Right hand comes in, takes away the single ring, comes back. As it comes back, the index finger of the left hand causes a break. The single ring comes behind, and the other fingers, these 3 fingers, grab the chain of 2, pull it away. Then you grab the single ring away, then show the key. Now, when you show the key, this hand does not return the rings in the original position. It turns around and places the chain of 2 next to the key and retains a single ring. Shows that for a moment. And this hand comes down onto the table and picks up the 4 remaining rings. Now remember, on the table, the single is on top. So this single is added to the other single. So that comes up and picks it up like this. Now when the hands come together, the trick has been reset to the original order. See, chain of 2 here, chain of 3, 2 singles, and a key. So in tempo, you magician counts. He goes 1, 2, does the break, switch, grabs a single away, puts that down with the single up on top onto the table. Now these next rings are counted. 1, that's counted 2, 3, 4. This hand, right hand, turns it around, puts the chain of 2 there, shows the single, places that on top of the rings on the table, picks it up, and the order is returned. That's the Claudius Odin count. In order to make sure that you completely understand the Odin ring count, I'll do it a couple more times. Okay, in tempo. 1, 2, 3, 4 rings go on the table like this. We have 4 rings here. We have another 4. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 rings. 4 plus 4 equals 8 rings. Okay, now I'm going to make it even clearer, and I'm going to use the substitute set here. Remember, we got the key, chain of 2, chain of 3, 2 singles. Magician counts 1, 2, 3, 4. Places this one down with the single ring on top. Counts again. 1, switch, 2, 3. Shows this one. Transfers it this way. Shows the single. Places the single on top like that. And there you have the Odin count. Now that you know how to do the Odin count, let me show you a little subtlety that was invented by the magician Charlie Miller. Now, Charlie Miller, instead of doing the Odin count the typical way, he did it with a slight difference, but it made the trick much more deceptive, or the move much more deceptive. Charlie did it this way: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now all it is the same count, except Charlie Miller figured that if you're going to do the exchange this way, it looks a little bit more deceptive if you move both hands outwards. And in my opinion, it's a great idea. Look, let me just get the order here. 1, 2, 3. There we go. He goes 1, 2, 3. It actually makes it a lot better. That's Charlie Miller's subtlety. One thing that Charlie Miller mentioned was that in his Magicana column is that some magicians, he noticed that some magicians do the Odin count incorrectly. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Some magicians, when they get to the third one, they don't reach in and grab the chain of 3. They don't grab the chain of 3. They put this 2 between and pull the other one from the back. And because of the way the hands work, if you do this, show you the original, it actually works better than forcing these two in between to pull it out that way. It just works better. And he brought that up, that magicians that do it are actually doing it incorrectly. The Ken Brook count is a variation of the Odin count. Now the thing you have to keep in mind is that when you perform the Odin count, you have to put down half the rings on the table to continue the count. Now the British magician Ken Brook was working nightclubs, and he did not want to interrupt the count by putting it on the table. So he developed this variation. Take a look, the Ken Brook count. I have here a whole bunch of rings. I have 1 ring, 2 ring, 3 ring, 4 ring, 5 ring, 6 ring, 7 ring, 8 rings, the Ken Brook count. To teach you the Ken Brook count, I'm going to use this substitute set of 8-inch rings. Now, Ken Brook, what he does is he tosses the ring into his right hand, puts it on his wrist, and then flicks his hand over like that. So it's a little juggling move, 1 ring. Brings the other hand up, places the 2nd ring there, and flicks his hand around down. Now when he does that, this hand causes a little break. The middle finger causes a break. Hands brought together, and the rings, these rings are pinched between the middle and the index finger. Now, if you take your finger and you twist your finger like that, you can cause these rings to pop out like that. You see that? Pop out like that. Now what happens is, when this hand comes up, the left hand places on the middle finger, places the set of 3. Chain of 3 is placed there, while these other finger, the middle and the index finger, rock that up that way. So when it comes down, this rocks this up, and then the thumb and the index finger there grabs the 2 separate rings, while the other fingers close up and come away. So I'm going to do that again. 1 ring, 2 ring. When this comes up, it places the ring there. These other fingers knock that out. The thumb and the index finger grabs that ring, the 2 separate rings, and these fingers, see these fingers, close up so that it can pull that away. Do it a few more times so you can see this, because this is kind of tricky here. 1, 2. Okay, let me make sure these rings aren't tangled. 1, 2. This hand comes up, places it right there on that finger, rocks this back. These fingers grab. These fingers close, and you can pull that away. Then you put the single ring on top, do the last twist, and throw these rings on the arm. And you can see that the single is closest to the wrist. Then you repeat. You toss 1 ring, you bring the other ring on top, place it there, and rock that up. And with the thumb and index finger, you pull that away. That's 2. You put this ring on top, you show this ring. Now here's how Ken Brook completes the thought. If he puts his hands together like this, he's going to change the order of the ring. So instead what he does is, he turns his wrist this way. So now the key ring goes right next to the chain of 2. He pulls this ring away. These fall down the arm. So he's got the 2 singles, and he brings his hands together, and now it's reset to the original order. You can even count again if you want to. And that is the Ken Brook count. There's one extra point about the Ken Brook count that I just want to bring up. It is not necessary to do the little wrist flip move that Ken Brook did as a flourish. It is perfectly okay for a magician to do the Ken Brook count When it gets to 4, just drop the rings on the arm and then continue the ring count as per natural. Okay, so just extra point, you don't have to do that wrist flip if you don't want to do it. It's perfectly okay to keep it this way. As you can see by the Odin count and the Ken Brook count, you have to stop halfway between an Odin count to be able to count them off properly. You know, you have to put half the rings down or half on your shoulder, or so it would seem, because I actually developed my own count. It uses a different kind of hand technique, and here's a set of 8 rings, key ring, chain of 2, chain of 3, 2 singles, and I'm going to count these as 8 using the Levant count. Watch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rings. The Levant count. So that you can understand the Levant count, I'll show it to you with this substitute set of rings. And what you're going to have to really pay attention to is the way the fingering, the way I steal the rings into my right hand. I want you to take a very careful look at this. What happens is, I count 1 ring, 2 ring. I cause a break, just like an Odin count, and I immediately put up the 2 singles and hook that there. Now, on my thumb, I let the chain of 3 fall. It's right there. Then I put my index finger around it, middle finger rather, and I pull away my thumb. And this is my technique. So it goes 1, 2, 3. All right, so I'm going to do it slow. 1, 2, capture them in the left hand, let them fall on your thumb, then put your middle finger around it and pull your thumb away. And if you do it smoothly, it looks like a proper count. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now here's the next part of my count. I want 4, 5. I bring this up. I hold the single on my left hand, let this drop on my thumb. 6, 7, 8. All right, so I'll show it to you again. Note that in my count, it changes the order of the rings, so you have to do a routine that works with that new order. So just so you keep that in mind. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll do it one more time in tempo with the regular rings. With natural timing, the Levant count is like this. 1 ring, 2 ring, switch, add another ring, switch, take 1 ring away, and the last ring, that is the Levant count. Some magicians have argued that the use of an Odin count, a count in which the magician swaps single rings for permanently linked chains, seems unnatural. I mean, to switch one set of rings for another, you're forced to put your hands this way. Now, it's possible that just a drop count might seem more natural. The problem is you cannot truly separate your hands with a drop count, because the rings are permanently linked together. But there is a different kind of count that you can do. You can show 1 count, 2 rings, 3 rings, 4 rings, 5 rings, 6 rings, 7 rings, and 8 rings. What you've witnessed is a count utilizing specially designed rings. Coming up next, special rings for special counts. And now I'd like to discuss the trick rings that magicians have used in the past that allow a magician to do the tricky counting of the rings to appear more deceptive. Now, the first trick ring that was used for this type of maneuver was called the oversized ring. Now, this was discovered by a gentleman by the name of John Northern Hilliard, who began to experiment with a ring that was slightly larger than a regular ring. So, for instance, this is an 8-inch ring. This is a slightly oversized ring. So this ring was made, custom made, to be slightly bigger, to just barely fit over the standard 8-inch ring. Now, he started playing with this oversized ring, and before I continue, I just want to give you a little theory on this, a theory on where this came from. I'm fairly certain that magic sets and rings came in all different sizes, especially in the 1800s. I mean, it wasn't just 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch, right? You had metric sizes. Plus, magic was a cottage industry, so rings are made in different sizes, made by different vendors, so there could be different differences. And I think probably John Northern Hilliard just discovered a ring that was slightly bigger than the other rings. And anyway, so in August of 1893, John Northern Hilliard begins to play with a ring that's bigger. And he goes to his friend Milton Chase, who is a magic manufacturer and machinist out of Boston, Massachusetts. And Milton Chase, by the way, has a connection with Chung Ling Soo and Keller. He was a guy that was known to be able to make good apparatus. And John Northern Hilliard swears him to secrecy, and he develops an idea. And his idea is that if you can take a ring that's slightly bigger than a standard size ring, you can make it seem as if the ring has linked onto it. So for instance, in this case, see, it fits over the chain. I can make it look like I've linked 3 rings, but you see this just fits over the standard size ring. So you can hang, like I said, an oversized, and you can simulate a linking and unlinking without having a key ring. Now, as I said, this is 1893. Later on, of course, John Northern Hilliard becomes one of the most important writers of the early 20th century magic. He wrote the book Art of Magic by T. Nelson Downs. We say by T. Nelson Downs, but actually the editor and actually the guy that did the heavy lifting and real writing was John Northern Hilliard. And he wrote another classic must-have book, by the way. You definitely should have Art of Magic. You can get it in paperback. And must-have is Greater Magic by Hilliard from the 1930s. Anyway. So John Northern Hilliard starts to play with this oversized ring, and he gets it published eventually, his ideas, I think it was in late 1924 in the Magical Bulletin, published by Floyd G. Thayer. A few months later, in early 1925, they publish it in this manuscript. This is a rare manuscript right here. It's the original here. It says The Master Method of the Chinese Rings by John Northern Hilliard. By the way, now this gets published in 1925. Thayer, by the way, in the 1925 catalog, which is catalog number 6 by Thayer, if you look up the Chinese linking rings in here, you'll see that they sell rings, but there's no mention of an oversized ring, because this came out at roughly the same time. And eventually there becomes a lot of interest in these oversized rings because of Hilliard's manuscript, and by 1928, the Thayer catalog number 7 has got the manuscript for sale, and they're selling oversized rings, okay, with a set. Incidentally, that manuscript is pretty rare, that little mimeograph manuscript from Thayer, but if you do want to read the original, in 1935, it gets republished. The text from that gets completely republished in a book called Leaves from J.N. Hilliard's Notebook by Thayer in 1935. Anyway, getting back to it. So, in 1925, 24 to 25, Hilliard publishes the idea of the oversized ring. Now there's another gentleman, his name is Dariel Fitzroy, is his real name, but he went by the name of Dariel Fitzke. He wrote the series of books, the Fitzke's Trilogy, right? It's very famous theoretical books on magic. Anyway, he starts to play with the oversized ring, but then he starts to play with something different. He starts to play with an undersized ring, meaning this is an 8-inch ring. An undersized ring would be a ring that's slightly smaller. So instead of one that fits over, it fits through. And he begins to use this to create a false count with the rings, a more deceptive false count. Eventually, he publishes this in this little booklet here. This is actually very rare. It's fallen apart here, but it's a very rare booklet, rather manuscript. This is called Linking Ring Manipulation by Dariel Fitzke. This is published in the year 1930. So this is an original one here. Later on, he actually does publish some of these ideas in his classic book, must-have for ring manipulation. It's called Rings in Your Fingers by Dariel Fitzke. This is from 1946. But anyway, it turns out, however, that Other people did experiment with these oversized rings. For instance, Victor Ferrelli from Europe played with it, independent of John Alden Hilliard. But because Hilliard was the first to actually publish it, and probably the first person to think of it, I will refer to the oversized ring, generally in this video, it will be referred to as a Hilliard ring. Okay, we'll just call it a Hilliard ring. It's an oversized ring. The undersized ring, however, first time it actually gets published, as far as I can tell, is Daryl Fitzke, so we call that the Fitzke ring. But there are other people that came up with this idea. For instance, Cardini had experimented with different sized rings. And it's interesting because Jay Marshall says that he knew that Cardini came up independently with the oversized ring. Other old-timers in the past had told me that Cardini came up with the undersized ring. Now, strange, if you look at Cardini's biography by John Fisher, Cardini Suave Deceiver, basically talking about her husband, Swan Walker, Cardini's widow, she says, he had a certain move with the linking rings. A guy out in California published it first. It's funny because that kind of, as a historian, you think you can track it down. Unfortunately, this was published in California. The Fitzke and the Hilliard stuff was published in California. So I don't know which one to believe. But so Cardini could have invented independently oversized and the undersized. But basically, from this point on, we're going to call it the Hilliard ring is the oversized. Undersized is the Fitzke ring. So coming up next, we're going to show you the various counts with the Fitzke and the Hilliard rings. This first count is called the Fitzke count, and it appears in Daryl Fitzke's book Rings in Your Fingers from the year 1946. We have here 8 rings. We have a chain of 2 in here and a chain of 3. And the whole point of the Fitzke count is to make it look as if these rings are completely separate. So the magician has 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings of steel right here. 3 solid rings of steel, very strong, very tough, solid rings of steel. 3 rings go down here. Now I have some more rings here. Those are 3 on the table. I have one, the 4th one here, 4th one, the 5th one, the 6th one, the 7th one, and the 8th ring, the Fitzke count. In order for you to understand the Fitzke count using the Fitzke ring, what I've done is, in addition to my substitute set of rings, I've taken the Fitzke ring and put some blue tape on it so that you could see the difference between that and the other ring. So let me show you how this works. The setup for it is you have the key ring, chain of 3, 2 singles, the Fitzke ring, and a single ring, a regular size ring. Now I just want to forewarn you before we do this, because of the tape and because of the tape that's covering these colored rings, they won't pass through the other rings as easily as they should. But we're going to fake this through just so you can understand the process with the hands, okay? So let's take a close-up look at this. What you do is you have to make sure the rings are set up in this order. Now I'm going to give you a little tip with an undersized ring or a Fitzke ring. You use your left thumb and squeeze down, press down on these rings, and you'll see that that ring pops up. So if you need to ever find that small ring, you squeeze down with your left hand, your thumb, so all the rings are flat, and you can reach in it and you can readjust the position of that ring. Now the Fitzke count goes like this. The magician counts off 1 ring, counts off 2 rings, and then when he makes a little break with his left thumb and brings the Fitzke ring inside and through the other rings and pulls it out. As I said, these are going to be tough because it doesn't fit because of the coating on the ring. But basically, you pull the Fitzke ring through, and as you are showing this rings in this hand, your fingers, your middle ring and pinky, pull the Fitzke ring through the other rings. I know it's a little bit stuck here because of the size. Pull it through so it's set into this order. And then the magician takes these rings and slaps them together and does a Odin switch, transfer from one to the other, and places the chain of 3 down on the table. Chain of 3 goes down on the table. Next, the magician reaches in with the rings in his left hand and pulls out the Fitzke ring. I know it's stuck here because of the coating, but shows 1 ring, pushes it through the chain of 2 and shows the other ring. Boy, that's really stuck on there, isn't it? Just doesn't, pulls it through that way, counts off the small ring, and then the magician counts off this ring, and then shows this ring. Let me do this one more time with a regular set of rings and the colored Fitzky ring. Okay, we're going to look at this Fitzky count one more time with an easier to use set of rings. Got the key ring, the chain of 3, the chain of 2, the Fitzky ring, and you've got the single ring. Magician counts 1 ring, picks up the Fitzky ring, 2 rings, then pushes the Fitzky ring between the chain of 2. So in other words, let me get closer here, I'll show you. The finger grabs it like this and pulls it out like that. So in other words, you're switching within the rings, you're switching the Fitzky for the chain of 2. So you got the chain of 2 and a single here. While you're showing this, the fingers of your left hand pull the Fitzky ring through the other rings and get them next to the key. Now you show these rings here, you do a Odin switch, place the real chain of 3 down, and now you reach inside. Remember, if you squeeze your thumb down, you can reach in and pull out the Fitzky ring. You push the Fitzky ring between the chain of 2, showing the chain of 2, the chain of 3, and you get the single, and you go like that. And that is the Fitzky count. It's hard to do, but I think you get the basic idea. And now this is a count using a Hilliard ring. This is an oversized ring. It's a ring that's bigger than other rings. This count uses 8 rings, a key, a regular single, a chain of 3, a chain of 2, and an oversized Hilliard ring. So this is how you would do the Hilliard ring count here. You got 1 ring, 2 ring, 3 ring. 3 rings of steel right here, strong as can be, 3 rings. In addition to 3 rings of steel, we also have 4 rings, 5 rings, 6 rings, 7 rings, 8 rings. The Hilliard ring count. Okay, now this is how you do Daryl Fitzky's count using a Hilliard ring. Now in this ring I put some tape on it so you can see it a little different than the single ring. So we have here a key ring, a single, a chain of 3, a chain of 2, and a Hilliard ring. So what you do is you show 1 ring. When you bring your hands together, you flop the Hilliard ring over the chain of 2 and pull away the chain of 2. So watch, it's all in the hand. You place this over, just you put, like in those, you put this Hilliard ring just past the chain of 2, and then you pull the chain of 2 away, and then you pick up the Hilliard ring and count it as 3. So in timing, it's 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. As you're presenting this with your index finger, you cause a break between the single ring and the chain of 3 in your hand. You say you have 3 solid rings, you slap them together, and as you bring them together, you do the Odin switch, switching that set for this chain of 3. Then what you do is you place the chain of 3 away for a moment, or you can put it on your arm. You show the Hilliard ring, put it over the chain of 2 and pull the, substituting the Hilliard ring for the set chain of 2. So it looks like you're counting 2 rings. So you go the 4th ring, you say the 5th ring. Now you put the Hilliard ring in this hand, you put the single in this hand, and you have the key, and then you have all 8 rings. And that is Daryl Fitzky's handling for the Hilliard ring. If you want to do a false count with the Hilliard oversized rings without the swapping of the rings, like in the versions by Daryl Fitzky, well, Victor Ferrelli came up with this method, and it's published in Greater Magic, and it uses 2 oversized Hilliard rings. So you got 2 rings that are extra large, and then you've got the chain of 3, a chain of 2, and a key. So now take a look how interesting this is. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings, 4 rings, 5 rings, 6 rings, 7 rings, 8 rings. This is the Victor Ferrelli count with a pair of Hilliard rings. And now I'd like to show you Victor Ferrelli's handling of the Hilliard rings, which appeared in Greater Magic. Now, since the only single non-key rings here are the Hilliard rings, I've removed the tape from them, so you can see they're just silver rings, and it makes it a little easier for me to handle. So we've got the 2 Hilliard rings, chain of 3, chain of 2, and a key. Now, this is what you do. You show 1 ring, Hilliard ring, 2 ring, Hilliard ring, put them both over the chain of 3 and pull the chain of 3 out, counting that as 3. Then you pick up the Hilliard ring 4, cross it on your arm. Then you show the 5th ring, which is a Hilliard ring, put it down here and put it over the chain of 2, count that as 5 and 6. Show the Hilliard ring 7, and then you got finally the key ring as 8. And that's Victor Ferrelli's handling for 2 Hilliard rings. I wanted to conclude this little discussion on Fitzke and Hilliard rings used with ring counts with just a little note to you that these are not the only counts that you can do with these rings, and you don't necessarily need full sets of 8. There's a lot of different ways that could be used, or you can use even more rings, like David P. Abbott used 14 rings, and he used the Fitzke ring in his routine. It's in the David P. Abbott book that the Miracle Factory sells now. And I want to just tell you there's multiple combinations. I didn't want to overload you with all the crazy combinations. Now, the Hilliard ring, as I said earlier, could be used for false linking, which we'll show you in a later chapter on this DVD set. But if you're wondering where to get these rings, I think that anybody who actually can make you a set of rings, like if you had a machinist, a metal worker, someone that can make rings, could probably fabricate them in any size. And you just have to make sure there's a good clearance between the oversized and the regular ring, or the undersized, depending on how you want to use it. Where I got these rings is from Owen Magic Supreme. This was a 12-inch ring. This is the undersized, which fits right inside perfectly. And here's the oversized that fits just like that. And as far as I know, Owen's Magic Supreme makes these and has them in stock in 12-inch sizes. They have them in 15-inch sizes and in 10-inch sizes, so they can do custom under and oversized and that. And they pretty much hand build stuff there. So if you wanted an 8-inch set, I'm sure that for the right amount of money they can do it for you. Now, I talked to the current owner of Owen's Magic Supreme, Alan Zagorski, and he told me that that they spent a lot of money developing the tooling to be able to make these rings in under and oversize. And quite frankly, they only sell 1 or 2 of these rings a year. And I think it's because people don't know the power of these tools. They don't know even what they do. I mean, some people would look at the Owens catalog online and go oversize and unsize and not know what you can do with that. Now, you're going to see later on how powerful the Hilliard ring is. You're going to see exactly how it could be used. So just going to keep that in mind. You'll see the power of the Hilliard ring a little bit later. And I'm hoping that people are going to start buying some more of these rings from Owens Magic. Not that, I pay retail from them, so they charge me full price on these. But I'm just throwing it out there that, these are very, very powerful tools. And don't let them, don't let the fact that they're underused make you think that they're not good for magic. So keep that in mind. I'd like to close out this chapter on ring counts by providing a little review of how you can do ring counts with various numbers of rings. Now, if a magician is doing a 2-ring routine, right, and 1 ring is a key ring, right, and the other one's a single, you don't need a ring count. The ring count is really used when you have chains of 2 or chains of 3 that you don't want people to know that they're connected. Simple. So if you're going to have a 3-ring set and one of them's a key, you just put 1 ring on the arm and put the other ring on the other arm, and you take, you could look at the, you could display the key ring. But let's say, for instance, if one of those rings is a chain of 2, and you want to do a very abridged routine, right? Well, then you could do a wrist count, 1, 2, 3, and then you can proceed to take a ring and tap it and link it and then do magic that way. Or you could do a drop count, right? This way, drop count. But let's say if you want to do a 4-ring routine. Well, if you can do a 4-ring routine, sure. You can do an Odin count. You can do a drop count. You can do an Odin count. 1, 2, 3, 4 rings, right? If you're going to do a 5-ring routine with 2, you You can do an odd count again, or drop count. You can just do it this way. You can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can do an odd count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're going to do a 5-ring routine with a chain of 3, then odd count might not be easy to do, but you can still do a drop count. For instance, you can count off 1 ring, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 rings, right? And you can do a 6-ring routine, or let's see, 6-ring. You'd be you could do it this way. You could do a drop count. All right, hold on. Let me make sure the rings are in set in the right order. There we are. So you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can do an Odin type count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, depending on how many rings you have, you can choose different techniques. But I just want you to know that Odin counts are not just for 8-ring sets. You can use them with a smaller number or even a greater number. So keep that in mind, and we'll see you on the next chapter. And now I'd like to show you how to link rings together, starting with techniques using an open key and a single ring. Now, to do this, you'd show your rings to be solid in any way that you prefer to present your rings. And then the oldest technique was this method. Magician would take his rings like this, wave it, and link it together. And then on the flip side, the magician would take his hands together, move it together, and he would just go like this, and the rings would come apart. To explain this most basic of techniques, I'm going to use the substitute open key ring and this solid ring. And I'll hold a solid ring in my left hand, and I'll hold the open key in my right hand. Now, you see where the key is open, I'm going to put my fingertip right at the opening there. So in other words, if I pulled my finger away, you'd see the opening, but we're just going to keep the finger there. Now, both hands move at the same time, and as you bring your hands together, at some point, you're going to let this ring, solid ring, go through the gap. But it's done while both hands are in motion. Both hands are in motion. And it is penetrated through, and then you don't reveal it right away. You don't want people to know the rings are linked just yet. You give it a little bit of time, and then you show the rings are linked. Now, you can reverse the motion, which is you can just bring the ring this way and push it through. Or sometimes you could flip this ring over like so, and you can push it through the same way. In other words, you start from the fingertip back this way. It doesn't really matter. Some people do it either way. Some people like to link it this way, and some people like to link it this way from the front to the back. And to unlink it, some people go from the front to the back, and some people go from the back to the front. But I'm going to explain a few extra notes right now, just so you do this properly. Now, this motion with both hands was brought to my attention by the magician Gerald Edmondson, who told me that sometimes magicians will just move one hand, and it makes it look obvious that you're putting the ring through the gap. And I think Gerald has a good point there. So again, what you're doing is you're giving two hands in motion, and because what you're doing is you're trying to make it look like you're rubbing the rings in these spots here. And it's that motion, and when you feel the time to do it, you can penetrate, which I just did there, and you can show it's linked. And then you can keep them both in motion, and separate it. And there's a little time misdirection there, as I mentioned earlier in the video. In other words, the audience doesn't know that the rings are linked or unlinked at that point, and you're just trying to make them think it's happening then. Right? So you say, look, I'm going to heat up these rings and keep them nice and warm. And then you've already done the link, and then you get to the point. They think the rings are separate. And then you say, wait, I'm going to get it together, hold it. There it is, I got it. And the reverse is true. You keep them in motion, so you've got to keep these rings nice and warm, got to keep them heated. You keep them moving, and you get to that point, and you say, when is it going to happen? And you let it go. Now, my old friend Jeff McBride, on his video, Magic on Stage, and certainly on the linking ring video that's part of the L&L compilation, Jeff does a thing when he separates the rings. He does like this mime motion, this motion that looks like the rings are still clinked together, and it's beautifully done. I mean, so that's, if you want to do a nice physical routine, that's a thing to do. He just pulls it, even though the rings are separate. He pulls it, and he shows tension there. And Jeff, it's worth getting his video, by the way, and to see how he does that release. And just to keep in mind that Jeff is at McBrideMagic.com, and in addition to the great videos, Jeff is probably the biggest teacher in magic. So I highly recommend personal instruction from Jeff. He'll certainly teach you everything he knows about the rings. So just keep that in mind, that the most portion in which you link and unlink, you don't want them to associate the connection of the hands here with the separation. You want a little time delay and let that happen there. Sometimes it's wise to do a secret linking maneuver on the cover of Misdirection. So if you have two rings here, you get to borrow this ring over here, and you can take this two rings here and rub them, and they link together. Now, all I did was, I had the key ring in this hand, the other ring was on the table, and the opening is right there. And when I say I need to get that other ring, I just put this ring through the opening, but I don't let it drop yet. So I just let it sit right there at the opening. I pick up another ring, and then I can do it this way, because sometimes the saying holds true, why run if no one's chasing you? The magician Michael Pascoe gave me this move to include in this video. To perform Michael Pascoe's unlink, you start off with the open key so that the opening is near the pinky of your right hand. You spin the other ring, and from magician's view, you reach and you get that ring from this side. In other words, you're looking out into the audience, you grab this way, while this hand, the right hand, is palm up. So in other words, you give the ring a spin and you get that corner there. You bring this hand up, like so, and then you let the opening come through the key, right there. So you give it a spin, the hand comes up, you let it come through the key, and you turn the key ring around and separate. So do it again, see, give it a spin, grab this one here, you bring this ring up, give it a spin like this, and then when you bring it up, you turn the key around, unlinking it. From the back it looks like this. Give it a spin, comes up, you turn the key around and separate it, and that's Michael Pascoe's unlink. This is a sleight that was shown to me by a magician named Fabio De Rosa, who comes from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Take a look. To understand the De Rosa delay move, I'm going to substitute the open key with the visible key. That's in the right hand. In the left hand, you have the single ring. Now, you link the single ring any which way you want. Give the ring a spin. You bring the hands up together and you unlink the single ring. Then what you do is you take your left hand and make it palm up and let the end of the single ring rest on your left hand. And you capture the opposite end of the single ring in the key ring. So it looks like the rings are linked, but there's a slight tilt to it. You see, if you pull it away, it would fall away. So just put it right there, and you lift, and you make the people think it's linked until you separate and show that they're unlinked. Now, we'll do it with the regular key. So you understand, you get the ring, you separate the ring out, you let the ring rest inside the key ring, and then you let it go. And that's the De Rosa delay. This next ring move is from the act of the late, great Richard Ross. To do Richard Ross's twirl link, you have to do two things. In your right hand, you have to hold the open key near your tip of your index finger. And in your left hand, you have to do a ring twirl. Now first, let me show you how to do a ring twirl. To do the ring twirl, you rest the ring on the tip of your thumb. You bring your middle finger alongside the thumb and pull the ring around. Then you bring your index finger to hold the ring between your index finger and your middle finger. You bring your thumb back under it, and repeat the process. So, index finger comes in, holds it, then your thumb, and if you speed up the movement, you have a ring twirl. While keeping that ring twirl going, you have the opening of the key ring, and you let your finger come off the opening, just a little hair, just comes off just a little bit. And then you keep the ring twirl and you time it so that when the ring turns this way, it goes through the opening on the key ring. So we're going to do it slow here. You see it turns and it goes right through the opening, and you continue rotating and letting it fall. So you start this way, and it's a timing thing. You get here, you let it through the opening and bring it down like that. Now, as for me personally, when I do the ring twirl, I prefer to move the ring in a clockwise direction. I actually prefer it this way. It just seems easier to me because I let it just fall through the opening on that side. In other words, it doesn't come from the back the way I do it. It comes from the front. Okay, so I'm doing it this way, but either way, it's a very, very pretty move, and that's the Richard Ross ring twirl. From the Tarbell course in Magic, this is Tommy Downs' Spin Unlink. The Spin Unlink. In order to perform the Spin Unlink, you hold the key ring in your right hand with the opening near your fingertip. On hanging from the key ring, of course, you have the single ring. Now you give that single ring a spin. So that ring is spinning very fast in a downward direction. Now as that ring spins, you flip your hand forward, and that ring will rotate, and when it comes to your fingertip, it'll pop out just like that. So again, you hold the ring here, you rotate that way, give it a spin, a hard spin, you flick your arm, and that ring will fly out this way and pop out. So I'm going to substitute this ring for one that you can actually do a spin with it. You see that spinning. You give that arm a little flick. So the flick looks like this. Give it a spin, and it pops right out. And that's Tommy Downs' Spin Unlink. This was Dai Vernon's primary method of linking and unlinking the rings. Link, and to unlink, you just go like that. To perform Vernon's method of linking the ring, what you do is in your right hand you have the open key with the fingertip. Left hand you have the single ring. Now you put the single ring behind, so in other words, if you're looking at the audience, the closest to you is the single ring. The single ring comes up right up to the opening of the key, and then you reach forward and grab the single ring, pull it, twist it around, and link it together. So let's take a look at this from a close-up angle. So from the performer's view, you're holding the key ring here, you bring the single ring right up against the opening, bring your hand forward, and twist the ring around, linking it together. Now to unlink it, it's the same process. The rings are linked, you put it behind, in other words, the single ring is closest to you and key ring is closest to the audience. You put the single ring right there into the opening, you bring your hand forward and twist it around, and unlinks. So from the audience view, it's put this here, you grab the end, you twist it, and that motion links it together. And we'll do it again. To unlink it, you bring your finger here, you twist it like that. And if I didn't have my finger covering, it would look like this. Your hand, it comes here, and then you twist to link. And to unlink, you bring it here, and you twist that way to unlink. And that's Vernon's method of linking and unlinking the rings.